When a Christian prays, he is not far from the faith. He speaks with Jesus. I say to pray. I do not say to say prayers. Jesus instead says, when you pray, go into your room and pray to the Father in secret, heart to heart. It is one thing to pray and another thing to say prayers. Chris Ferrara, is this another sort of papal bombshell in the making?
One of many. I mean, the ground is littered with craters from the bombs that have been dropping from the mouth of this Pope. I'm sorry to say that, and it pains me to say that. Again, in our last episode, I pointed out that when he was alive, I was very sick, and I was almost Pollyannish about the election of Pope Francis. I was over the moon about his apparent simplicity and piety, apparently because I knew nothing about the man and his background. And I have to say that Rorate Celli stands vindicated when it made a quite dire announcement concerning its own perception of the election of Francis. Again, it grieves me to say that, but it's been one bomb after another. And what you just quoted, the idea that one must say, one must pray as opposed to saying prayers, this is a disjunction, a false disjunction that is typical, I have to say it, of modernist thought, as if there is a dichotomy between praying and saying prayers. Where is this dichotomy?
Am I being paranoid? When I read this today, it struck me once again, since tradition-minded Catholics are among the few who are still saying rosaries, and I know this is statistically something we can back up. The rosary isn't even being taught in more liberal or mainstream Catholic schools, grade schools anymore. Is this just another sort of a brush off of against the traditionalists on the part of Pope Francis?
Well, let's make a couple of precisions here. I mean, obviously, if one recites the rosary in the manner of a machine gun in a completely rote manner without meditating on the mysteries, then one is not really praying. If that's all Pope Francis means, that's completely unobjectionable. But the idea that saying prayers without actually having a spiritual consolation or actively meditating and seeking communion with God is in itself an ideological activity that should be rejected by Catholics. This is just bad pastoral advice. It's fundamental pastoral advice that Catholics, even when they receive no consolations, should say their so-called rote prayers, doing violence to themselves when they don't want to pray, by reciting the rosary, even if they get nothing perceptible from it in terms of spiritual consolations, because grace has come to them from the mere act of sitting down or kneeling and setting aside 15 minutes to pray to God in the prescribed way that the Church has handed down from generation to generation. There's nothing wrong with saying prayers in a rote manner as a guide to at least an attempt at meditation, even if you're not really trying to meditate.
That's right. I remember
this is a false disjunction, again, between saying prayers and praying.
You as a father of 6 children know very well how it is when you have young children. It's very difficult to teach your 5-year-old to commune and commune with the Lord and all of these things in a sort of metaphysical sense. But it's not very difficult to set your child down with the family at night and pray the rosary. And probably more importantly, for your child to see mother and father kneeling on the floor before the Vigilite and the statue of Our Lady reciting, yes, if you want to call it that, those rote prayers, is an example that forms a child in a way that nothing else could, spiritually speaking.
Where is the sensitivity here? I see a kind of anti-pastoral naivete. I hope the Pope doesn't think that the average Catholic has achieved the unitive state and is capable of daily intensive meditations, directly communing with God in the unitive state for a half an hour a day or 15 minutes a day. I myself am far from that state. I rely on the prayers that the Church gives to me as a guide to the spiritual life. And I know that many times I don't want to pray, and I do violence to myself. I make myself say these so-called memorized or rote prayers because that is as good as it's going to get for me in the middle of the daily stresses of life. And that is often the salvation of people. This idea that we're all going to be sitting around in our rooms privately communing with God on a high spiritual level, it's naive. It's obviously something we should strive for. But what do we do in the meantime?
There's a certain Protestant flavor to it. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that's what was intended, but there's a certain Protestant flavor. I remember the old priest, one of the most beautiful and spiritual priests I've ever known in my life, a La Salette father, used to counsel us as young people. He would say, if you're praying the rosary, you're showing the son that you love the mother, and even if you should fall asleep in the middle of the rosary, it is still such an act that is so pleasing to God and to his mother that you can count, he would say, it's sort of the pious wisdom, you can count on your guardian angel to finish the rosary for you. Isn't that just such a more beautiful approach to trying to like you say, be a pastor and lead people towards the spiritual life, than giving the impression that you don't care for it, that repetitive prayer is useless, or that memorized praying is not praying at all?
Yeah, I mean, where is the vaunted sympathy for the sinner and the weak of heart? And I count myself among the vast majority of Catholics who are not in the unitive state. I mean, if we were all in the unitive state, we'd all be saints, canonizable at this very instant in our lives. We struggle to achieve communion with God in the way that we can, and the Rosary is an important part of that struggle to stay connected to God. The idea that we're going to go into our closets and have deep interior meditations, it's laudable, but it's not practical pastoral advice for the average person. And this is part of a pattern. It seems to me that there's an inescapable pattern of a total lack of sympathy for Catholics of traditional orientation. It's been one statement after another. A statement about counted rosaries, mocking counted rosaries, about legalists, about Pelagians. I mean, listen to this statement given during the organizational meeting for the bishops during the Pope's recent trip to Rio de Janeiro. He talks about the Pelagian solution to the situation in the church, which he describes as a form of restorationism. A purely disciplinary solution is sought. Through the restoration of, get this, outdated manners and forms, which even on the cultural level are no longer meaningful. What in heaven's name does that phrase embrace? Outdated manners and forms, which even on the cultural level are no longer meaningful. That could be the entirety of the faith as we practiced it for the Second Vatican Council. Not just memorized prayers, the Latin liturgy. What about indulgences? What about the traditional vestments? Everything traditional seems to be tossed out the window here.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, what do we do if memorized prayers are somehow problematic? What do you do with all the indulgence prayers, the temporary indulgences that are offered through praying? Oftentimes we're praying for the Holy Father and praying the 3 Hail Marys or the Rosary or whatever it might be, the Stations of the Cross. These are all memorized things for the most part. So if one gets the impression from Peter on down that memorizing prayers is no longer called for, or no longer prudent, so much for indulgences as well. It does.
That's not good, sensitive, and compassionate pastoral advice. That's the cruel schoolmaster. What? You aren't in your private prayer closet communing directly with God? The God that we worship, because he is merciful, gives us an A for effort. That's what praying the rosary, even when you don't want to, is all about. We struggle to stay in connection with God, to set aside time for him, whether or not the quality of the meditative experience is at the level of a canonized saint. What about A for effort? That goes right out the window, too. Apparently that's an outmoded form. I'm sorry if I sound acerbic and sarcastic, but really, Mike, I've had enough of this. It isn't just one statement or 2 or 3. It's about 20 or 30 statements, all of the same tenor, that you old-fashioned Catholics with your restorationist, legalist, disciplinarian ways are not authentically Christian. That's the inescapable message. It's insulting.
It's insulting. And Chris, what's going to happen? I'm sure you've had people in your family who've passed on, older folks, aunts and uncles. I remember very clearly when my Aunt Betty died, and we took turns at her bedside. She was way up in her 80s. And you know what? She couldn't communicate anymore. She couldn't speak to us. She sort of, you know how it is, in and out of recognizing loved ones. But you know what she could do? And you know what she did all night long and all day long when she was conscious at all in the hours and days before she died? She said, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." And then she would fade out. Hail Mary. She was just That's what she was clinging to. And for us, we're already talking about a loss of Catholic identity throughout the whole church. To rob the present generation of that sort of solace, even just the memorized prayers, for heaven's sake.
Well, the so-called memorized prayers that we supposedly recite in our restorationist, antiquarian, disciplinarian way, these prayers were actually delivered to us by heaven itself for our use in the spiritual life. They come from God. The Rosary comes from God. The prayers of the Psalter come from God. The Our Father, the basic prayer of Christianity, was dictated to us word for word by the second person of the Holy Trinity. If we recite that, are we reciting a rote prayer that is merely memorized?
Chris,
this is staggering.
What is going on?
I
was just going to ask you that. What is going on, my friend? I mean, this is, I don't understand it. I don't want to believe that the Holy Father is intending to say these things, and I want the spin. I want the good, favorable, positive spin, but he keeps saying things that are getting increasingly difficult to spin in a Catholic direction. What in the world is going on?
I think part of what's going on, it might have been revealed by Sandro Magister on his website. He cites a commentary by one Marco Garzonio to the effect that Francis, who admittedly is a great admirer of the late Cardinal Martini, one of the most rank modernists in the modern history of the Church since Vatican II, that Pope Francis is actually following the Martinian program. And there are coincidences here which just cannot be explained away. This commentary by Garzonio says, Martini said that the Pope should be pursuing a synodal church, a church governed by synods. That's all we need, more committees of clerics to run the church. And what is this Pope doing? He's pursuing a synodal church. Martini said the Pope should surround himself with a group of cardinals. That's exactly what the Pope has just done. He created a commission of cardinals. Martini advocated some sort of solution for those poor, divorced and remarried Catholics who have been told that they're living in a state of adultery, which they are. What do we do about these poor Catholics living in a state of adultery? We need a solution for them. Well, Pope Francis has intimated that this commission, which is going to meet in October of 2014, will somehow find a solution. Well, pray to God that they don't. That will allow divorced and remarried Catholics to have access to the sacraments, even though they're living in a state of adultery. I mean, again and again, he seems to be adopting the Martinian program, the program of Cardinal Martini. And in the interview with Eugenio Scalfari, the atheist, he refers repeatedly with admiration to none other than Cardinal Martini, his fellow Jesuit, a flaming modernist who came under harsh criticism even from the Vatican, for his dubiously orthodox views. I find the whole thing alarming.
You mentioned...
I'm almost at a loss for words.
Yeah, you mentioned Sandro Magister. I mean, he was giving a talk, apparently in Rome, it was about a week ago, and just bringing up the Pope's own quotations and his own statements of recent statements. And Cardinal Burke apparently had to absent himself from the situation. So my point is, Sandro Magister is hardly a radical bomb-throwing traditionalist. This is a mainstream Italian journalist, and he's looking at the same things that we're looking at and going, I don't know what to do. I do not know what to do other than to quote what the Pope is saying and ask others to try to interpret it in a way that makes some sense, because so far it doesn't.
Well, Hillary White at LifeSite News put it best in a recent column in which she said that we've had a lot of strange pronouncements since Vatican II from places high and low in the Church, including from popes. But no pope, she said, has ever troubled Orthodox Catholics as much as this one in the various off-the-cuff statements he's made. And now even the mainstream media are picking up on this.
Yeah.
I read an article the other day about how conservative Catholics are now expressing alarm about this pope. Not just the so-called radical traditionalists, which would be you and me.
Yeah.
In other words, Catholics who simply went on being Catholics the way they were before Vatican II, but even so-called conservative or mainstream Catholics who attend the new Mass and are otherwise Orthodox and find this Pope's statements disturbing and alarming.
Yeah.
This can't be denied any longer. What are we looking at? That's what I want to know.
We're either looking at incredible overstatements or unbelievable, earth-shattering understatements, like the other day when he actually said that the two great evils in the world today are the unemployment of youth and the loneliness of old people, Chris. There are millions of babies being slaughtered. There's universal apostasy throughout the church. There's scandal at every level. The priesthood has been equated now with pedophilia and homosexuality. And the worst thing we face is the unemployment of youth.
By the way, I thought about that a bit. When a kid gets a job, one of these unemployed youth, what does he do with the money?
Another iPhone.
He's going to go out and buy video games. Why is youth unemployment such a problem?
Yeah,
they're not supporting families. It's ludicrous. But, you know, I neglected to mention something. This is a really chilling coincidence between what Francis is doing and the agenda of Cardinal Martini. We remember that Pope Francis said, "I don't believe in a Catholic God." An utterly banal remark. I mean, nobody actually believes that God is Catholic. What was the point of saying that? The point, apparently, as the press perceives it, not unreasonably, is to say, well, let's not be so hung up on this Catholic thing, because God is so much bigger than the Catholic Church. A very peculiar thing for the Vicar of Christ to be saying. But it turns out that Cardinal Martini said much the same thing, and I'm quoting. He said, we cannot make a Catholic of God. So here again is another example of the strange coincidence between the Martini program, he's no longer with us, and the program of Pope Francis. I don't think it's a coincidence that can be overlooked.
Yeah, the contradictions there, too, where he says these things about atheists. He basically seems to be saying, hey, boys, you're okay, don't worry about it. And then the next day he's talking about the devil and how we have to, you know, gear up and prepare spiritually for battle. I'm just trying to figure out which is it.
On that point, Mike, listen to this. He gave an absolutely splendid homily on October 11, 2003, about being on guard against the devil. And he talks about demonic possession and the reality of it, that it wasn't just a psychiatric disturbance in the times that we read about it in the Old and New Testament, but literal demonic possession. And then he says, do we not ask ourselves the question, do I guard myself, my heart, my feelings, my thoughts? Do I guard the treasure of grace? Do I guard the presence of the Holy Spirit in me? Or do I let go, feeling secure, believing that all is going well? But if you do not guard yourself, he who is stronger than you will come. But if someone stronger comes and overcomes, he takes away the weapons in which one is trusted, and which one has trusted, and he shall divide the spoil. Vigilance, he says in this homily. And he goes on to talk about vigilance against the devil. Jesus fights the devil, he says. He who is not with Jesus is against Jesus. There are no attitudes in the middle. This is what he's saying to Catholics. We must be vigilant against the devil. There's no middle ground. If you're not with Jesus, you're essentially with the devil. If this is true of Catholics, why isn't he telling this to the atheists, the Muslims, and the Jews, whose message for them, at least as far as this Pope is concerned, is basically follow your conscience and you're okay? Aren't they under the dominion of Satan like the rest of us? And if we have to be vigilant against the devil, what about them? If they're under attack from the devil, and if, without the helps of the faith, they've actually been imprisoned by him, they're in chains, why isn't he warning them about that? Is all of this just for Catholics? Are there two parallel universes? The one in which Catholics go to hell, and the other one in which nobody else does? What is going on here?
So what is the point of converting anyone? It seems almost like a violation of Christian charity nowadays to try to convert an atheist, because apparently all the rules only apply to us. But the atheist is going right to the happy place, so why not leave him alone?
And Cardinal Ratzinger, writing in 1991, talked about this idea of the good person who is not a believer, who follows his conscience, even if it's an erring conscience. And in that excellent essay, Cardinal Ratzinger said, well, if that were true, then ignorance of the faith, the lack of faith, would be the ordinary means of salvation. Where does that leave the Catholic Church? Where does it leave us? It seems to us the safest way to heaven is to apostatize immediately.
So okay, there's no way on earth that's what he's trying to say. So we've got to parse it and figure out what is he trying to say then.
It's a blatant self-contradiction. And this is a feature of modernism. The modernist believes self-contradictory things at one and the same time. He does not live by the principle of non-contradiction. There's no other explanation for this. He's telling us to be vigilant against the devil, and he's telling atheists, do good and we'll meet there. What about the devil?
Yeah.
How are they going to do good if they're not being vigilant against the devil?
Yeah. Now, of course, our
I throw up
neo-Catholic,
my hands.
yeah, our neo-Catholic friends are going to say, well, he was very clear. He said, I'm a son of the church, and thereby suggesting, thereby insisting that he does accept the doctrine, the dogma that seem to be under question right now. But the point is, why say things like that? Whatever happened to caution, especially from the Pope's lips? Caution when speaking to the world. I mean, you have to be very careful. So it seems like perhaps he believes in the right way in his heart, but he thinks that he has to sort of, he can say things to the world that's going to influence them, not realizing they're going to take the ball and run with it, which is exactly what they're doing. So by now, why hasn't he realized, I wonder, why this approach isn't working? It didn't work in Buenos Aires. It's not going to work in Rome. But he doesn't seem to accept that.
His diocese, the archdiocese he left behind, is not exactly an oasis of the faith.
Right.
It's got the same problems as the rest of Latin America. And the chief among them is contraceptive mentality has permeated the Latin American populations. And the church in Latin America is hemorrhaging Protestants, hemorrhaging Catholics, rather, into the Protestant sects. Because the Protestants can do Protestantism better than the Catholics are trying to do it.
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
They have better sermons, better preachers. They make a better case. They tell a better story. And if you're going to have masses with guitars and drum sets and bongos, you're not going to convert anybody with that. That's not a liturgy that's going to attract souls and reconquer the Western world for Christ. That's just bad entertainment. They can get better music in a Protestant chapel or congregation.
No, that's right. Well, I don't know. Obviously, we're not going to solve this today. I'm just shaking my head. I mean, I've got to raise 7 children. You know, we're seeing things like the Common Core curriculum coming through the public school, possibly into the Catholic school system. No, it's already in the Catholic school system because they're embracing it. People are worried about homeschooling. Everything, the wheels seem to be coming off everywhere. And I look to Pope Francis, and I don't see any clarity. In fact, I'm finding more confusion looking to Rome right now, and I know I'm not alone in that. So, you know, again, is this just the diabolical disorientation that we can expect at this particular time in history when mankind is in full revolt against God?
You know, I keep reminding myself that when you and I went to the papal conclave to see the election of Pope Benedict, we both had tears in our eyes because we love the church and we revere the Pope and the office that he occupies. And that's how I felt when Pope Francis was elected. The same way. I was in awe of that whole event, and I was so hopeful about Pope Francis. I don't enjoy sitting here doing the post-mortem on the latest papal statements that make the church and make us look ridiculous, which they do. I'm sorry. That's the truth of the matter. I don't enjoy it at all. I'd rather celebrate the Pope. You and I did that.
We tried.
Again and again with Benedict.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, even the mainstream press acknowledged that with the election of Benedict, the Remnant became a papal loyalist newspaper. Mm-hmm. That's what we want to be.
Right.
So anybody who's watching this, we don't really get our kicks out of doing this. I'd much rather be talking about the great things Francis did for the church, the statements he said standing up to the culture of death, the condemnation of big abortion, the opposition to gay marriage. I'd rather say Francis is leading a civil rights movement to restore the church to her rightful place in society. Not that he's saying things like there's no Catholic God. Such utter banality from the Vicar of Christ.
Yeah, yeah.
That's depressing. It's depressing. No. It gives me a queasy feeling. We haven't been to this place yet in the post-conciliar epoch. This is a new destination on the train ride to disaster, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to let that be the last word because I think that pretty much just sums it right up. I don't know what to say to people other than to agree with you absolutely that this is terrifying. And as a loyal son of the church, you know, all of us as sons and daughters of the church, no one enjoys this. I'm waiting every morning when I get up for Pope Francis to come along with a statement that says, oh, erases these ones that I just so far that have caused so much perplexity and confusion.
I think it's paramount that we pray for the Pope. The opening to the world, as Paul VI admitted, has resulted in an invasion of the church by worldly thinking. The enemy is inside the household of the faith and is running through all the rooms of the house right now.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. And we need to pray for the Pope. with every rosary. We need to be praying the daily rosary. I'll do it tonight, and I'll recite my rote prayers, and I'll fight against distractions the way I have to do so often.
That's right.
But I'll do that as my attempt to offer some kind of reparation and to stay in connection with the God who made us all and is standing over this whole situation, to pray that he protects the Pope and protects the Church.
That's right. I'm going to do the same thing, brother, tonight. I'm going to maybe we'll say 2 rosaries with our children, for Pope Francis and for the Church and for all of us, that we retain our equilibrium during a really tough time in the Church right now. So
Let's hope we can say something a little more upbeat the next time we get together.
we'll work on it, and we'll see you then, okay?
Take care, Mike.
All
God
right,
bless.
see you later. Bye-bye.